Hey guys, so we're back with our next installment. I know that it's taken me a little bit to get these out. I've kind of failed, which is typical for me, at doing what I intended to do with these, which is stay ahead, like a couple of videos, at least, like have them kind of recorded and already edited and ready to go. And yeah, I haven't been able to do that at all since I started, and now it's even a lot harder. Our kids are home for the summer. My wife's a teacher and home for the summer, so it's made it harder for me to find time to record these videos. So yeah, so who cares? We'll get them done. Maybe I'm thinking they'll at least be done by November. At 110, I have Fox Confessor Brings the Flood by Neko Case from 2006. When I first heard Neko Case in the late 90s with her debut album, The Virginian, I just wasn't really all that impressed. Like, there was nothing that really grabbed me about it. And so I didn't really fall in love with her until I discovered the New Pornographers, and it took that power pop music to really get me into her. But my love for Neko Case grew a lot more once I met my wife, who was a big fan. And I was a casual fan, at best a casual fan, but my wife was a really, really big fan of hers. And, you know, just spending time with her, you know, in the car on dates or on road trips and listening to Neko in the car, it was, you know, she just grew on me, you know, and that just shows how important, you know, the impact of a significant other, you know, can be on your music taste. This album in particular, I just think it's her strongest. I think it's her best vocal performance. The harmonies included that are sometimes recorded by her, and then also, you know, Kelly Hogan, who's spent time playing in her backing band. Her songwriting really took a strong step forward here. She wrote or co-wrote all 12 tracks on the album, where this album really separates from the pack, and especially her previous work, is in the production. It just opens up. There are elements of pop, you know, in this record, and it's almost brighter even. It's especially a lot brighter than her previous record, Blacklisted, which I think is still a strong album. But I just love there's a lot more variety, you know, in emotion on this record. My wife and I have seen Neko Case outside of the New Pornographers twice. The first time, she and her band opened for My Morning Jacket. And if I remember correctly, her set got cut short because there was a big thunderstorm that came through, and it was an outdoor amphitheater. The second time that we saw her together was at the North Carolina Art Museum in Raleigh, which is kind of out in a remote location, and they hold these summer concert series. And wouldn't you know, fucking rained again. But it was before her set started, so really it was just her set was delayed. We still got a full show, and it was fantastic. You know, when those storms kind of like move through, and especially when they move through quickly, and you're out in kind of like a remote area where there's not a lot of buildings and other stuff to like fuck up the sky, you know, the clouds pass by and it clears up, and those stars are just out, and they're just absolutely vivid. You know, and we had grabbed a spot like up on the hill, like, you know, further away from the stage and from other folks, like in their lawn chairs. And my wife was pregnant with our first child. It was kind of early on in the pregnancy. But yeah, we just sat there, and we more than anything, we just listened. You know, it wasn't even about seeing the band or being up close. You know, it was just about just being in the moment. And honestly, probably my favorite concert experience with my wife. So I always think of that, always, when I listen to Neko Case, especially this album, because it's my favorite by her.
Compared to some I've been around, but I really tried so hard. That echo chorus loud to me, that's hold on, hold on, hold on, hold on. In the end, I and that is real as true love.
At 109, I have The Miseducation of Lauryn Hill by Lauryn Hill from 1998. So this is a pretty big album. If I remember correctly, it won Album of the Year at the Grammys. It was very well received when it came out. For me, this album is kind of important because I at this time, I was into hip hop, but I was mostly into like groups like The Roots or like Outkast. And I felt like she really fit in with that, you know, with that kind of sound. In the late 90s, around 97, 98, this is when hip hop really unseated rock and roll, you know, as popular music. I wasn't really a big fan of what was the most popular hip hop at the time. So for someone to put out a record that also sold well, but was of better quality to me than Puff Daddy and Bad Boy and all of that oversampled stuff, it was a big thing, and I felt like it was an important thing. It's a brilliant concept album. It's one of the best concept albums in the history of popular music, in my opinion. I love the little interludes, the way it sounds like they're being recorded in a classroom, and there's a teacher kind of asking the students in the room like questions about the big things in life, you know, the big things that we deal with as people. And every song speaks to those larger things, those big topics. And she does it so well. She's a great songwriter. And that's what I love about this album, is that it's more than just like a hip hop record or more than just an R&B record. It's in a way, it's a singer-songwriter record, you know? And that's why I feel like it has so much in common with Marvin Gaye's like What's Going On. I feel like it's just continuing that legacy. At 108, I have Picaresque by the Decemberists from 2005. So it was a couple of years before this album came out, and I bought Her Majesty the Decemberists. And at the same time, right around the same time, very in close proximity to one another, I also bought their first album, Castaways and Cutouts. And yeah, I was hooked. I loved this band right out of the gate. Colin Meloy's storytelling is absolutely incredible. And the band itself, great players. But this album really started to shift their sound, and it brought in bigger, more refined production. But it didn't sacrifice anything about their character and who they are as a band. It's still all about the stories, you know, and these stories are just fantastic. It starts off with like the Infanta, which is just this huge parade, you know, of royalty and basically the presentation of the king's new daughter. And then, of course, there's, you know, the sea shanties that people are kind of used to from the Decemberists, and, you know, plenty of death, like love suicides and things like that. I once sat down and did an exercise where I assigned a body count to each one of their albums. The amount of people that died on the record. And this one was pretty high. I don't remember the exact number though. The Mariner's Revenge, kind of like the penultimate thing that marries all of those macabre subjects. It's the story of basically a ship that was destroyed by a whale, attacked by a whale, and the two survivors that survived in the whale's mouth just happened to be the ship, I believe the ship's captain, if I remember correctly, and then a younger steward of the ship that has been planning a lifelong revenge murder of this captain, because the captain left him and his mother and his family destitute. Then there's the Bagman's Gambit, which is a love affair between two spies, and it kind of has this soundtrack that really does kind of tie into like film noir really well. But even outside of all of the subject matter that seems so historical and and placed in years past. He also writes really good songs that can be envisioned in present day, like The Sporting Life, which is quite humorous, but also really taps into anxiety in a way, all about from the narrator's perspective of being flat on his face on the field, and his teammates and his coach and his parents and his girlfriend all looking down on him in disappointment, in sheer disappointment. But the real masterpiece on this album is on the Bus Mall, which is just this tender and yes, sad song about two male prostitutes and just their daily life.
Among all the urchins and old Chinese merchants of the old town, we reigned at the pool hall with one iron cue ball, and we never let the bastards get us down. And we laughed off the quick tricks, the old men with limp dicks on the colonnades of the waterfront park. As 4 in the morning came on cold and boring, we huddled close in the bus stop enclosure enfolding our hands tightly holding. But here in our horror, we fused like a family. But I will not mourn for you. So take up your makeup and pocket your pills away. We're kings among runaways on the bus mall.
At 107, I have Ga 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 by Spoon from 2007. I absolutely love this album. I love this band. I did a whole video spotlight on Spoon. They are what I tell people, they're my favorite contemporary band that's still like together, that's not defunct. They just write incredibly intelligent pop rock that is meticulously crafted. They just have opened me up to so many of the artists that I love because of how much they were influenced by them, like artists in the past, like Elvis Costello and The Jam. They increased my love of the Kinks. They got me into bands like Television Personalities and Wire. I saw them a few times touring behind this album, and this I think was their strongest lineup. And this album in particular, even though it's not my favorite, hint hint, it's still one that I think it's the one album that I recommend to people that have never heard Spoon, because I feel like all of the experimentation in the studio is still there, but this is by far their most accessible record, and it has the most hooks, just absolutely the most hooks. This was it came out around a time for the band where they had really built their audience, like over the previous few albums. But the last one, Gimme Fiction, which came out in 2005, really started to kind of like elevate their presence, you know, amongst the larger indie rock fan base. You know, they brought in John Bryan to produce one song, The Underdog, which is, I think, kind of considered probably their most popular song to date. It has these fantastic horns. It's a very typical John Bryan track, but it fits in perfectly, you know, with the sound of this record. It's incredible pop rock, as I said, intelligent pop rock. There's also a real influence of like R&B and soul in this record. And you really hear it in songs like You Got Your Cherry Bomb, which almost has these stacked sounding horns. And then my favorite track, my favorite Spoon song is on this record, Rhythm and Soul. And it's pure rhythm and soul, that sound of that song. It's great. At 106, I have James Brown, live from the Apollo from 1963. I love James Brown as much as the next person. Everybody loves James Brown, right? But I just feel like, I've always felt like personally, and he does have some really good studio albums out there. Of course, the Payback, and I can think of a few others. But for me, the best thing about James Brown is live. And he's got so many great, absolutely incredible live recordings. Love, Peace, Power. Or is it Peace, Love, Power? Is another one that I think is an absolute classic. But this one is my favorite. It's an absolute icon, recorded earlier in his career at an iconic venue. And it just has an absolutely iconic sound to it. It's got the best things that the best live albums have, which is just this electric performance. You also hear the crowd screaming. I love that. I need that in live recordings. That's why I hate so many bootlegs, because especially ones that come from the soundboard, you don't ever hear the audience. I mean, what more is there to say? It's James Brown and the Famous Flames. The masters of medley. The medleys on this are just that alone. Incredible. Absolutely love it. Yeah, an absolute classic. At 105, I have Purple Rain by Prince and the Revolution from 1984. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this. There's nothing that I have to say about this album that other people haven't already said. I'm a fairly big Prince fan. I'm not the biggest Prince fan in the world, but there are people that are just, they get, absolutely everything by him, and I'm not one of those, but I love Prince. I love Prince. I love more what he was. I will say that, two things. I'll tell this one little quick story that I saw in an interview with Peggy McCreary, who was a sound engineer working at Sunset Sound during the sessions for this record. She also worked on 1999. And she talks about how with this album, things just got big, right? Things just got big. He had this full entourage that was with him all the time, and the industry folks were always around. But then there was one night, and they worked well into the morning on it, I believe, if I remember correctly what she was talking about, on When Doves Cry. And she said that song had gotten just absurd. There was just too much shit in it. It was all over the place. And she just kind of removed herself from the criticism of it. But then he started to take pieces out of it, right? He started to remove things from it. And there's no bass in that song. And she says that he took the bass out, and he says, nobody's going to believe that I did this, nobody, basically, I'm going to blow those motherfuckers' minds by just removing the bass out of this song entirely. The other funny thing about this is that I've actually never seen the movie in its entirety. I've seen bits and pieces. I've seen clips that are worked into videos. I've seen just clips of performances from the movie, things like that. Never seen the movie all the way through. I don't think I'm ever going to. I feel like I've made it this far along in my life where it's just the thing. It's just the thing that I should keep. It's just a thing about me. I've never seen Purple Rain all the way through, and I love Prince, and I love this album. So, hey, At 104, I have Speaking in Tongues by the Talking Heads from 1983. For many years, this album would never have shown up on a list of my favorite albums because it just alone because I liked some of the albums from the 70s so much more than this. And I had listened to and seen the concert film of Stop Making Sense many, many, many times before I actually really listened to this album all the way through. I mean, I just knew the singles that were on best of collections or whatever, but I had spent so much more time with Stop Making Sense than I did this album. But over the years, especially I'd say within the last 10, 11 years, I've really fallen in love with this record more and more. It took me a little bit to get used to with this record. and even more so than like Remain in Light, but it's just bigger sounding, and it's the production on it is so much more refined and a little bit more like pristine, and it took my ears some getting used to, you know, with compared to what I loved so much about Talking Heads, you know, before really giving this album the full attention that I gave it. But now I love that bigger sound, and I love them bringing in all of the additional musicians, and especially Bernie Worrell's contributions to this album. I mean, they're just phenomenal. I love the vocal performances on this record. They're just really going for it, you know, on this album, where they're a little bit more intelligent and meticulously crafted and arranged on like a record like Remain in Light. And then on previous records, it's just David Byrne's like quirkiness, you know, that makes the vocal so cool. But on this one, they're just really going for it. They're really trying to put together an album that just has really great singing performances. This Must Be the Place, Naive Melody, is my absolute favorite Talking Heads song. It has been for many years. And if I remember correctly, there's a interview of David Byrne saying that it was really the only love song that he ever really wrote. I don't know if that's completely accurate. Maybe up to this point, I don't know. And I might even be misremembering the interview exactly how he said it. But it is a song that has a lot of heart in it. And a lot more than a lot of other Talking Heads songs, you know, that are just, I don't know, just kind of art rock for art rock's sake, you know. And there's some real emotion in that song and some real feeling, and it's why I love it so much. It's why it's my favorite song by them. At 103, I have Blood on the Tracks by Bob Dylan from 1975. Just another Dylan masterpiece. This is the second Dylan album that has showed up on this list so far. It took me a while to get to Blood on the Tracks, actually. I was so into his 60s output, especially his classic 60s output, for so long that it really took me a while to come around to this album, to listening to this album. I don't remember at what point in my life I heard it for the first time, or I would say it was probably in my mid-20s when I really started to fall in love with it. And it's an album that's just grown with me more and more over time. You know, there's all this backstory behind this album, and at the time in the 70s when it came out, there were so many people that you know, thought that this was his comeback album or whatever, as if he actually ever went away. He never really went away, but at the time, you know, that's everybody knows that that's kind of like the story behind this album. I have no attachment to that. I can't even put myself in that like headspace retrospectively because of how much later I discovered it, you know, and so that means nothing to me. It means nothing to me. I just think that this album is brilliant, and I also think that really it's his most emotional record from start to finish. There's something about Dylan sometimes where he almost, at this, especially when you discover him the way that I have discovered him and the way that hopefully future generations will continue to discover him. The thing about Dylan is that, like, much like the Beatles, they are almost bigger than the music at this point. You know, the way that everybody has talked about them. And this is the one album, even though it's not my favorite Dylan album, it's the one album where I never really feel like Dylan is bigger than the songs. At 102, I have Rubber Soul by the Beatles from 1965. I'm pretty sure that I've read it. So this is not some kind of revelation that I'm claiming. It's just for me. I've always kind of felt, and I've heard it just in the albums itself, to me, that I just feel like 65, 66, this was when Paul and John were really at their best as partners. After Revolver with Sgt. Pepper's, the Beatles just really kind of became Paul's band, right? Like, that's just kind of what happened. I'm not saying that John wasn't still great, you know, it didn't have incredible moments, and I think even George's best moments started to come, you know, in 67 and onward. But it just kind of became Paul's band. And here in my mind and in the way that I listen to these albums, you know, this is just such a strong band record to me, you know? I just love every single song on this album from start to finish. In My Life is up there as one of my favorite Beatles songs. I think it's also, if I put together like an objective list of what I think the 10 greatest songs ever, you know, that have been written ever, I would put In My Life in there. Run for Your Life's kind of like the one thing, I don't know, I listened to that song in 2021 and it doesn't quite sit right with me. Rubber Soul, the Beatles, come on. Fuck, let's just move on. And at 101, I have Kid A by Radiohead from 2000. So I still love Radiohead, but in those years, in the 90s and the early 2000s, I was obsessed with Radiohead. I was all about Radiohead. Some of my best friends were just as obsessed, if not more obsessed than I was. We were Radiohead heads. We were Radioheads. Obviously inspired by electronic music and electronica, kind of like the big electronica thing that had happened for the, you know, few years prior. I don't think it's as much of a left turn as so many people say. There's still elements of this record that you can tie back to OK Computer. It's not that dramatic of a shift, in my opinion. A lot of people talk about the kind of like where this thing happened, where like Radiohead put this album out and it just turned a lot of Radiohead fans off and blah blah blah. And that did not happen. That did not happen. Like, I'm telling you, it did not happen. It might have happened for Radiohead fans that were like in their 50s or something when this album came out or whatever. That did not happen for people that were my age when this album came out. We were already all in on Radiohead, and we were gonna follow them no matter what the fuck they did at this point. Like, we had become sheep, you know? Like, it was just, nothing was gonna change. Like, our opinion, everything they were gonna put out at this point in time was gonna blow us away. But it still has everything that the best Radiohead albums have. That sense of drama, that sense of emotion, that sense of feeling that it can evoke in the listener.
As a result, they produced the greatest album of all time, Kid A, signaling a shift to a more electronic-based sound which was even more intelligent and less pop-friendly than OK Computer.
It solidified the band's reputation as the world's most aesthetically challenging rock stars.
They were ahead of the curve in using the official website to interact directly with fans, keeping a running online diary during the recording sessions of Kid A and its sequel 2001's Amnesia.
The greatest album of all time.
So I do want to mention the channel Listography. They recently had me on for this game show thing that they've kind of started, which is actually really fun. I've enjoyed every episode that I've seen. Mine is the 4th one. It just got posted. And it was fun. It was a fun little exercise, you know. It was cool, and I really like those guys, and I really like that channel. It's a really good channel. So I highly suggest you guys subscribe to that and check it out. The little game show thing is called Recommendations, and so it's kind of like competitive record recommending. And just watch it if you have the inclination at all. So, yeah, I really, again, if you don't watch that video with me, whatever, just subscribe to their channel, see kind of some of the content that they're putting out. It's a really good music discussion channel, and those guys are big music fans, and that's what I like the most about them. I want when I'm watching somebody, I want to see someone that I feel is like a music fan first. You know, I can get just stupid critics like anywhere, you know, and they do a lot of criticism, but they are music fans, you know, first, and you hear that. So check them out, Listography, and I hope everybody's doing well. Yeah, you know, it's the summer. What are you gonna do? Hope everybody's staying cool. That is the dumbest fucking thing. That is just the stupidest shit people say during the summer. Whatever.
Digital gramophone makes no sense.